at its own pace, a rhythm dictated by the sun and the seasons. On that Tuesday morning, the Harmattan haze had settled over everything, a fine, dusty veil that softened the edges of the world. The air was cool and dry. Women were setting up their stalls in the market, their voices a familiar melody as they called out prices for yams and peppers. Men gathered under the shade of a large mango tree, their laughter punctuated by the clatter of drafts pieces on a wooden board. It was a day like any other. Life in Okuta was simple, predictable, and deeply rooted in a shared sense of community. The dust from the unpaved roads was a constant companion, coating sandals and settling on windowsills, a quiet testament to the town's unhurried existence. Then the peace was shattered. A single sharp sound cut through the morning calm, a crack that was too loud, too violent for a firecracker. It was followed by another, and then a chorus of them. The sound came from the direction of the Union Bank, the only one in town, a squat building painted a hopeful but fading blue. People stopped. The market chatter died. The men under the mango tree froze, their game forgotten. Chaos bloomed suddenly like a poisonous flower. Screams replaced laughter. People ran, not knowing where to go, only that they had to get away from the unnatural noise that had invaded their ordinary morning. The Harmattan seemed to stand still, holding its breath as terror took hold of Okuta. 4 men, their faces obscured by black masks, had descended upon the bank. They were not from Okuta. Their aggression was foreign, their movements too sharp and practiced for this sleepy town. They brandished guns with a casual menace that spoke of a life lived outside the gentle rhythms of this community. They herded the bank staff and the customers into a corner, their voices harsh commands that brooked no argument. Money, crisp and smelling of the vault, was stuffed into large sacks. Their actions were efficient, brutal, and terrifyingly swift. They were a whirlwind of violence in a place that had known only the slow, steady breeze of the Harmattan. The town, once a single breathing entity, was now a collection of scattered, frightened individuals. The robbery was not just a theft of money, it was a theft of something more profound. It stole the town's innocence, its deeply held belief in its own safety. The blue Union Bank building, once a symbol of modest prosperity and trust, became a monument to vulnerability. The men moved without hesitation, their confidence an insult to the fear they inspired. They were spectres of a harsher world, a world that Okuta had tried to keep at its gates. As they prepared to leave, sacks heavy with the town's wealth, it felt as though they were taking the very soul of the place with them, leaving behind a wound that would fester long after their departure. The Harmattan dust would settle again, but it would now cover a landscape forever changed by fear. As the robbers emerged from the bank, backing out into the hazy sunlight, the town was paralyzed. People hid behind flimsy market stalls and peered from behind curtains, their bodies trembling. The world had shrunk to the space in front of the bank, a stage for a drama nobody had asked to see. The 4 men were about to melt back into the anonymity from which they came, their victory seemingly absolute. They held their guns high, a clear warning to the silent watching eyes. To challenge them was to invite death. To stay hidden was to guarantee life. The choice seemed simple, a primal calculation of survival that every man, woman and child in Okuta was making in that moment. The air was thick not just with dust, but with collective unspoken fear. But one man made a different choice. Officer Emmanuel Obina was not a man of grand ambitions. He was a husband and a father of 3, a familiar face who waved to children on their way to school. His police uniform was often creased, and his smile was more common than his scowl. He was part of the town's fabric, as ordinary and as essential as the well in the market square. When the shots rang out, he was not far away, finishing a cup of tea at a small kiosk. He did not have backup. He did not have a heavy weapon. He had only his service pistol, worn from years of use, and a sense of duty that ran deeper than his fear. He saw the men, the guns, the sacks of money. He saw the terror in his neighbor's eyes. His decision was made in a heartbeat. It was an act of pure, uncalculated courage. While others ran for cover, Emmanuel ran towards the danger. He raised his pistol, his voice a lone, defiant shout in the terrified silence. "Stop! Police!" The words were swallowed by the vastness of the moment, a single ripple against a tidal wave of violence. The robbers, surprised by this solitary resistance, turned their attention to him. For a brief, suspended moment, it was one man against 4, one sense of order against a force of chaos. He was not just a police officer in that instant. He was the town's last line of defense, a single brave soul standing for everything that had been violated. It was a terribly uneven fight. The response was immediate and brutal. The air exploded with gunfire, a volley aimed not at the sky, but at the lone figure in the dusty road. Emmanuel fell. The sound of his body hitting the ground was lost in the roar of the getaway car's engine as the robbers sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a silence more profound than before. His act of defiance had lasted only seconds. But in those seconds, he had offered his life for the town he served. He lay there, his uniform stained with something far darker than the harmattan dust, a forgotten sacrifice in the making. The town had been saved from the robbers, but it had lost something just as precious. In the days that followed, the story of the robbery took on a life of its own. It became the town's new myth, a tale told with a strange mixture of fear and admiration. The robbers were no longer just criminals. They were transformed into legends. People gathered in small groups, their voices low and excited, recounting the events with dramatic flair. They spoke of the robbers' audacity, their coolness under pressure, their phantom-like escape. 4 men, they would whisper, their eyes wide, and they were gone like spirits in the wind. The story grew with each telling, the men becoming taller, their guns more powerful, their loot more immense. They were not villains, they were protagonists in a thrilling new folklore. The narrative of their daring became a form of entertainment, a distraction from the dullness of everyday life. Young men, in particular, spoke of the robbers with a kind of reverence. They were seen as bold figures who had challenged the system and won, taking what they wanted with impunity. Their crime was reframed as a clever heist, an act of rebellion. The fear they had caused was quickly forgotten, replaced by a grudging respect for their skill and courage. The story was told and retold at palm wine bars, in barbershops, and over evening meals. It was a story of action and success, and Okuta, a town where little of consequence ever happened, was hungry for such a tale. Amidst this chorus of excited whispers, one name was conspicuously absent: Emmanuel Obinna. His act of bravery was an inconvenient footnote, a detail that complicated the thrilling narrative. Why talk about the man who died when you could talk about the men who got away? His sacrifice was a somber note in a story people wanted to be exciting. He was the loser in the tale, the obstacle that had been swiftly removed. To remember him was to remember the fear, the violence, the loss. It was easier, more comfortable to focus on the victors, even if they were criminals. His heroism was quietly erased from the public memory, deemed less interesting than the robber's villainy. And so, the town of Okuta made its choice. It chose the captivating story over the uncomfortable truth. It celebrated the spectacle of the crime while ignoring the substance of the sacrifice. The robbers, who had terrorized them, were immortalized in conversation. Officer Emmanuel Obinna, who had died for them, was relegated to the shadows. The community, which he had considered his own, moved on without him, embracing a narrative that made them feel alive, even if it was a story built on a foundation of violence and theft. The whispers continued, weaving a legend around the criminals, while a heavy silence fell over the memory of the hero. While Okuta buzzed with the legend of the robbers, a different reality was unfolding behind the closed door of Emmanuel's small two-bedroom home. Here, there was no excitement, only a thick, suffocating grief. His widow, Adana, moved through the house like a ghost. Her world shrunk to the four walls that now felt like a prison. The laughter of her husband was gone, replaced by the sound of her own quiet sobs. Her three children, too young to fully grasp the permanence of their loss, only knew that their father was not coming home. Their questions, "When is Papa coming back?" were daggers to Adana's heart. The silence in the house was a living thing, heavy with unspoken pain and unanswered questions. The authorities for whom Emmanuel had given his life offered little more than platitudes. A few officers came to the house in the first days, their faces grim, their words rehearsed. They promised support. They promised his benefits would be processed quickly. They promised justice. But as the weeks turned into months, the promises faded into the Harmattan dust. The files were in process, the bureaucracy a slow, grinding machine that had no room for a widow's desperation. Adana was left to navigate a labyrinth of paperwork and empty offices, each visit chipping away at her hope. The system her husband had served so faithfully had abandoned his family in their darkest hour. The community offered no solace either. The neighbors who once shared greetings and gossip now averted their eyes. Adana's grief was a mirror reflecting the sacrifice they had chosen to ignore. Her presence was a reminder of the inconvenient truth that spoiled their exciting story. Invitations stopped. The friendly chats over the fence ceased. It was as if the Obinna family had become invisible, their sorrow too heavy a burden for the town to acknowledge. While the community celebrated the perpetrators of the crime, they ostracized the victims, leaving a grieving woman and her children to fend for themselves in a world that had suddenly turned cold and indifferent. Adana's struggle was a private, lonely war. She fought against poverty, her husband's meager salary having been their only source of income. She fought against despair, trying to be strong for her children while her own heart was breaking. She fought against the crushing silence from the town and the state. The public fascination with the robber's crime stood in stark, cruel contrast to the private suffering of an honest man's family. Adana learned a bitter lesson. Her husband's life, given in service, was worth less than a thrilling story. The town had found its heroes, and they were not the ones who wore a uniform. As the dust settles in Okuta, both literally and figuratively, a profound question hangs in the air. Who is the real hero in this story? Is it the four men who, with guns and audacity, took what was not theirs? They were bold, they were successful, and they became legends in the mouths of the townspeople. Their story provided a thrill, a brief escape from the monotony of life. They represented a kind of power, a defiance that many, trapped in their quiet lives, secretly admired. The community, in its hunger for a grand narrative, elevated them. They were the victors, the ones who shaped the event and walked away with the prize, leaving an unforgettable tale in their wake. Or is the hero the man who stood alone when everyone else hid? Officer Emmanuel Obina did not have the glamour of the outlaw. His bravery was quiet, dutiful, and ultimately fatal. He did not succeed in stopping the robbers. He did not win. He only made a choice to uphold his oath, to protect the community that would so quickly forget him. His heroism was not in victory, but in the attempt. It was in the selfless act of placing the well-being of others above his own survival. His story is not a thrilling adventure. It is a tragedy, a somber reminder of the cost of duty in a world that often values the wrong things. The contrast between the two legacies is a stark indictment of our collective memory. We are drawn to the spectacle, to the flash of rebellion, to the story that entertains. The quiet, steady heroism of a man like Emmanuel is often too plain, too sorrowful for us to embrace. We forget that behind the thrilling tales of crime are real victims, real families shattered by loss. Adana and her children live with the consequences of that day, their private suffering a direct result of the public's celebrated event. Their pain is the unseen cost of the robber's legend, a silent testament to the town's misplaced admiration. A community's character is not defined by the stories it tells, but by the heroes it chooses to remember. Ultimately, the story of Okuta is a story about all of us. It forces us to look at who we celebrate and who we forget. A true hero is not defined by their success or their power, but by their sacrifice. Emmanuel Obina was a hero, not because he won, but because he tried, because he stood for something when it would have been easier to stand for nothing. The cost of forgetting men and women like him is steep. It erodes our sense of justice, our compassion, and our understanding of true courage. It leaves the families of the fallen to grieve alone, and it teaches the next generation that a good story is more valuable than a good man. The real tragedy of Okuta is not the money that was stolen, but the hero that was forgotten.